Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you?
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want.
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
Join us as we travel and explore the vast unknown. It's a hero's journey with dragons to slay, damsels to save, and innumerable treasures to hoard. Torches high.
Look at it from a different perspective.
Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. Tonight we welcome on our first-time guest, Justin Brown, to talk about his new book, The Epic of Esau, The Birthright and Seed War. Justin, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good, brother. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to talk about this book. I know we've been in contact for quite some time. You were kind enough to invite me on your show, so I'm glad that we finally are able to bring you on the Sharpening Report to talk about this really interesting new book, and it covers a topic that I haven't really heard that much about. Before we get into that, though, as is tradition. Oh, well, actually, before we get into that, let me remind the audience, if you are watching for free on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and click the bell to turn on all notifications. For YouTube, for Rumble, that side of it, that's the best way that you can help support what we do here. And if you are interested in these kind of topics and you want more, go to dailyrenegade.com and you get all of our full videos there, early access for members and all that stuff. We'll get into some more information about that later on. But, okay, as is tradition for all new Sharpening Report guests. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us how you came to know Christ and how that led to what you do today.
Yeah, man. My name's Justin Brown, and just a 9-to-5 knuckle dragger, blue collar guy like everybody else. I got a full-time job and a family and kids, and try to balance life and get off of the rat wheel every once in a while. But I'm from the hills of East Tennessee, so some people might refer to us as hillbillies. I'm a hillbilly. But where I grew up in the Bible Belt, church and God was always a major role, and knew the Bible stories. And I was that little kid that was always fascinated with the Word of God, had a million questions, and always was inquisitive. But of course, for my story is very common. It's kind of like the prodigal son. You go through the years of rebellion, and came back to Christ in my early 20s and straightened my life out. And it was honestly just how do I word it? Just like doom scrolling on YouTube, and stumbled across people, like you and Derek Gilbert and Trey Smith, and started talking about all these, wild and weird things in the Bible that in this book that I thought I knew so well. And I quickly found out I didn't know anything. So once I got into some of your guys' work and books, and Michael Heiser, he was a big contributing factor. It just started this thirst for knowledge, man, and to see this book in this supernatural worldview. And it's just a fire that started that I couldn't quench, and ended up just leading to talking to friends and doing little Facebook videos, and the next thing you know, a buddy of mine's like, hey, let's do a podcast. And two and a half years into doing that, I glutton for punishment. I had to start another show, and then that led to a book. It's been a heck of a journey.
That's amazing. Yeah. And there's so many parallels to that with, like how I got into all this too. It's very similar. And a lot of people that kind of, a lot of the somewhat newcomers, I guess, like us, about I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, somewhere around there was an explosion where Christians were learning what the Nephilim were for the first time. And I had never heard that word before. And then once I started hearing it, it was like you. I mean, all of the questions that I had about the Bible that I thought I knew so well as well and didn't, they were being answered by this question of, who are the Nephilim and what is that all about? And that's really interesting because that's going to be part of what we talk about today. But so what I've noticed, and tell me if this is true for you, what I've noticed is usually authors' first book is like their most personal one. What was it? How did you come up with this book idea, and what does this mean to you personally?
Well, honestly, it was just a catty joke amongst friends. Trey Smith was one of the guys that I first found in this space, and he kind of was that bridge to expose me to other people. And I actually was fortunate enough to have him on one of my shows, and we're actually friends. We actually text now, so that's pretty cool. But I had him on the show, and we were just talking, and he was like, "Hey, you're from East Tennessee? That's Bigfoot country." And he said, "Maybe I should come down and we'll go Bigfoot hunting sometime." And I was like, "Yeah, man, come on down." And I knew the stories of Bigfoot, and I mean, I'm sure I had a couple Bigfoot T-shirts and stickers and stuff like that, but I was never what I would call an enthusiast. I had friends that were, so I just had a very surface level of the Sam Squatch, as some people call him. And I don't know, man, it's just out of nowhere. Genesis 25:25 popped into my head, and I was like, the first one come out red, covered in hair from head to toe, like a hairy cloak. And so I said to Trey, "Trey, what do you think about Esau? You think he might have been what we call today a Bigfoot?" And he kind of chuckled, he's like, "You may be onto something there." He said, "He was one hairy dude, that's for sure." And it kind of, that's what got it all started. It was just a catty little joke. And doing the show that I do, I had Gary Wayne on a couple weeks later, and we were looking into the Epic of Gilgamesh, and boom, I bump into this guy that's covered in hair from head to toe and fights Gilgamesh. It sounds a lot like Esau. He was a mighty hunter of the field. And then another episode came, and I had to read the book of Jasher, and then I found in there that Nimrod and Esau fought to the death, and found these supernatural garments from the garden of God. And I was like, man, it's just like this little breadcrumb trail is kind of that the Lord led me down. And then I actually just did a show with a buddy on his podcast, and it had a really great response. And I just had all kinds of people reaching out and was like, "Man, you should write a book. You should write a book." And so I just sat down, man, and just went on this Hansel and Gretel breadcrumb trail, and just started grabbing all these little puzzle pieces and putting them together for this story. And it's wild, because if I wouldn't have looked through the extra biblical books like Jasher and the Midrash and Targums and Louis Ginsburg, Legends of the Jews, I would have discovered this. But it's wild when you put it all together. It weaves in and out of the Bible almost seamlessly and answers a lot of just ambiguous questions about this enigmatic character.
So from the Bible, give us some background on who Esau was, and then what. Well, maybe I'll save that for the next question after that. Let's give some background to who this Esau person was. What did he do? What was his family life like? Give us all that, and then tell us about some of the weirder aspects of his life as well.
Yeah, from the biblical narrative, we're introduced to Esau in Genesis 25, and it's the pregnancy of Rebekah, and the angel of the Lord shows up and tells her that two nations, two peoples were in her womb, and they struggled together, and they were at enmity with each other in the womb, and that one would be stronger than the other, but the younger would rule over the older. In the ancient Jewish context, I mean, that's completely backwards. That would have been like a red flag to the people reading that, because it's the eldest that gets the birthright, and the youngest serves the older. So, immediately it's like, whoa, something's different here. And you keep going on. And at the birth, it says that Esau, he come out red, covered in hair, head to toe, like a hairy cloak, and that Jacob was clutching his heel. And to me, when I read that, it was like, I immediately thought of Genesis 3:15, And the dragon slayer prophecy, it talks about, there will be enmity between the two seeds and crushing of the head and bruising of the heel. And as you go on, you just get this picture of this, how do I word it? Manly man, this mighty hunter of the field, and he's rebellious and he just kind of does what he wants. And he's painted, kind of like this rebellious, manly man child. And it kind of fast forwards to their adult years, and it just says that one day out of the blue, Esau just comes in from the field exhausted, the book of Genesis says. And his brother Jacob was preparing red stew. And he asks for some of this red stew. And then Jacob just says, yeah, I'll give you some stew, but give me the birthright. And he just says, what use is a birthright to me when I'm dead? Take it. And I remember hearing that story as a kid, even as a kid. I was like, that makes absolutely no sense to me. He was the mighty hunter. He could have went and had lion steak for supper. And he trades away all of his inheritance for some crummy stew. And you go on through the Bible and you hear him kind of weave in and out because it follows Jacob. He, takes off and steals the birthright and the inheritance by tricking his father, Isaac, pretending to be Esau. Esau is angry and threatens to kill him. So he takes off and hides out in the land of Haran of his mother and gets married and has some kids and stuff. And after a long period of time, decides to come back home and make amends with his brother. But then it just kind of goes with the genealogies, and he takes 3 wives and marries into Ishmael's clan and some of these Horite and Hittite clans. And he just kind of fades out. But then you hear about his people. His people were the Edomites. And those were kind of the people that were a thorn in God's people's side. And it talks about, in 70 AD, when Nebuchadnezzar rolled in there and destroyed the city, that the Edomites just sat back and watched basically with popcorn and cheered and even celebrated watching God's people being put in chains and led back to Babylon. And then, in the New Testament, in the book of Romans, and I can't remember what Old Testament, Malachi maybe, but it says, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. So, I mean, he's a very mysterious character, and it's one of those, like when I read the biblical text, I'm like, I want to know, I want some more context about this guy. I'm missing something.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great rundown of who he was as a person from what we learned from the Bible. So before we try to connect that, what is separate from that? What is your overall opinion of what Bigfoot is? Like people, I believe people are seeing something, and I've got my own kind of opinions about what it might be. But I'm curious to know, just by and large, generally in our world today. What do you think people are seeing? Is this some animal out there? Is it something spiritual? Is it something else entirely? What are your thoughts?
Well, then one thing I kind of took a little rabbit trail in the book was talking about the wild man traditions. And I mean, it doesn't matter, where you go. It's kind of like the giants. Doesn't matter what time frame you go to, what people group. They all have stories of giants. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like that with this wild man. I mean, you go down into China, they talk about the urine, and he's this humanoid thing, for lack of a better term, with high intelligence like a human, but is covered in hair from head to toe and lives out in the wilderness. And you go to Europe, they call it the woodwose or the woodrose. And you hear all these stories and legends about, these hairy looking men and women that live out in the wilderness that would just ransack the towns and steal food and supplies and women, rape women. And they end up having these hairy children, and they called them, basically demonic seeds or devil seeds. And it's just everywhere. And you got in America, you have the Native Americans talking about the red-haired giants, and that, they were covered in hair, and they called them the Sitika. So I kind of go down a little rabbit trail and just kind of establish this wild man tradition. And I think that this Bigfoot is just our verbiage or way to explain this ancient story. I think it's the same thing. And when you go looking through like some of the science, because a lot of people just hear this and they just laugh it off and don't even look into it or try to investigate. But I mean, there's a lot of science behind this, and I didn't know this till I kind of started studying this in the book. There is a condition to where if you are in the wilderness and it's cold and you're struggling to survive, you're not eating well, your body goes into anorexia, it triggers your DNA to grow hair all over your body. And it's called Logano hair. And so I was like, well, I wonder, because in the ancient world, it was all about survival.
Yeah.
If you were a thief, if you were a liar, if you had a disability, if you were a threat to society or couldn't contribute to society, you were exiled and you were to live by yourself off in the wilderness. You got Robin Hood and his merry men. So I was like, could it be possible that these people that were exiles for whatever reason, just like the homeless people today, they gather together in communities and they start growing all this hair. And of course they're wanting to survive. So that would answer the questions in the stories of these people ransacking these villages and doing the things that these wild men were quoted to do. And if they're breeding amongst each other, they're going to be reproducing this, genetic, effect. And there's even people born with it. It's called hypertrichosis. And it talks about people, it's rare, but it happens. People are born covered in hair from head to toe. And they got all kinds of scientifically documented and historically documented people that were photographed and written about and painted. And these are the people that in the late 1800s and stuff, in the Middle Ages, were in these freak shows. The Wolf Man, the Bearded Lady. So I think that that's just kind of like a more like scientific explanation. But there's also the spiritual side, because you hear people with their encounters, seeing them phase in and out of reality, UFOs, mind speak, and all that kind of stuff too. So I just kind of theorize. I'm like, if this is like a Nephilim gene and they are disembodied spirits, cursed to roam the earth forever, according to the book of Enoch, would these guys not want to take a similar form, something that they used to look like? Just a hypothesis, but it makes sense biblically.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take that I haven't heard before, but it does make a lot of sense, especially if there is those latent genetics already built into mankind, because they have found people that have lived in the wilderness and stuff, and yeah, they're a lot different. And something else that I've thought about too is, I'm glad that you brought this up, the spiritual side of it, because demons are looking for somebody to inhabit. If we look at some extra biblical books like Enoch and stuff like that, it talks about how demons in their just in disembodied form, they're constantly hungry, constantly thirsty. It's just pure torture. And then so they possess people, but we know that for demons, sometimes it's really difficult to possess a person. And in a sense, they're always at the risk for getting cast out or even cast into the bottomless pit from a Christian who knows what they're doing to remove these things. So I've theorized before, what if there is actually just an animal that's a large ape? If I was a demon and I knew that I was going to put myself in some risk if I tried to inhabit a human, well, what would be the next best thing? Maybe this more intelligent, elusive animal, or possibly even some type of human that's out in the wilderness and is basically feral or just out in the wilderness. And so I could see, what if a bunch of demons did that and had a community out in the wilderness somewhere, and they have migratory patterns and they do all the things that, typically animals would do, but they're just basically surviving because it's the only thing they can safely inhabit. And it's just, it's just a theory. But if that's true, that might explain some of the supernatural things that people see Bigfoot doing. Because if you compare it with some of the things that people who are demon possessed are said to be able to do, like bilocation and teleportation and all this stuff. You hear people that are possessed, some of them can do that too. There's so many parallels there that it makes me wonder, like, in some way, if these two aren't connected. So those are some really good points, and I hadn't thought about that before, but that's really good. So do you think, connecting that idea now with Esau, would you say, do you think that Esau was in some way something similar or the same thing as whatever this Bigfoot species is?
I think so, because if you just let the text, say what it says. I mean, he was literally covered in hair from head to toe, like a hairy cloak. And I've heard people say, that's hyperbole, or that's just kind of like poetic language. But the problem with that is Isaac's blessing.
That's right.
When you go to that story, Isaac was the favored. Esau was the favored son of Isaac. He was the man's man. So he called him into the tent and said he was going blind in his old age. And he said, son, my life is fading, and I want a taste of your game one last time. Go out on a hunt and bring me some of your game and prepare for me a delicious meal one more time, and I'll bestow the blessing upon you. And so that showed me, even though he, verbally agreed to trade the birthright to Jacob, it was kind of like he had his fingers crossed behind his back. He's like, nah, I really ain't going to do that. And so he goes off to hunt, and Rebecca hears it and then tells Jacob, go out to the field, kill a young goat, and bring it to me. I'll prepare a delicious meal for your father, and you'll go in, pretend to be Esau, and steal the blessing. And immediately Jacob's like, no, mother. He said, I am a smooth man. And he said, if my father thinks that I am playing a trick, a curse will fall upon me instead of a blessing. And she said, just do as I say. And if there is a cursing, allow it to fall on my head. Just do as I tell thee. And he goes and does it. And they take the fur of the goat to wrap around him to deceive their blind father. So, I mean, this was literal. He was literally that hairy. And then when he walks in, he says, I hear the voice of my son Jacob, but I feel my son Esau. And then he makes a comment, and he says, but you even smell of the field, so I know you are my son Esau. And with these Bigfoot stories, you get all these, stories about these phantom, wretched smells. And, and people can say, oh, well, he just had a hairy arm. Man, have you ever felt of a goat's fur? I mean, it's thick. I mean, it's oily. It's coarse. And no, I mean, this was something different, man.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So do you think there's a connection to what people see today, Bigfoot, whatever that is, and the ancient Nephilim? And adding to that, do you think Esau was, at least in part, Nephilim?
Yeah, and it was weird going down this rabbit trail, because one, it's like you have this hairy quote unquote man, right? If we seen today out in the woods, without hesitation, we would say, I seen a Sasquatch. That's how he's described. And when you follow genealogies, thanks to Gary Wayne in his book, the Genesis 6 conspiracy, and how well, and thorough he went through those genealogies. The clans, the Canaanite clans that Esau marries into, are Nephilim giant clans. They're part of the ones that God commanded to devout to destruction when the Israelites returned through the Holy Land. And the one father-in-law that it mentions, in the genealogies of Genesis. It says that he was basically the giant clan chief from the land of Mount Seir. And in Hebrew, when you break into the etymology of that word, that means hairy. So it was describing these people. And so I was like, if you got this hair already, muscular, mighty hunter of the field, Sasquatch looking guy, marrying into Nephilim giant clans that are described as hairy and breeding with them, I mean, you got a high likelihood, of throwing some really strange pups. And when you follow that, Amalek comes from this union, and he births and leads the Amalekite race, which was a Nephilim giant clan, but they were the most famous one. They were known basically like Viking berserkers. I mean, these guys were ruthless, and they're known for just dominating. And when you get into like Louis Ginsburg's Legends of the Jews, it talks about when God's people was coming through the wilderness in their wanderings, they were the first ones to attack them, but they said they were like ghosts. It was like the first, type of like militia, guerrilla style warfare. They were picking them off from behind and then getting back in the woods before they even knew what happened. It's like they were just picking them off like ghosts. And it said they done that to them and just toyed with them for months. And that when they finally went to war and stuff and was doing this, that they were so ruthless that they would cut the men's phalluses off and throw it into the air and said, give their God what he wants. I mean, these guys were ruthless. And their name, the Amalekites, means blood lickers. So it's kind of got like even a vampiristic feel to it. And I postulate in the book, I give all the examples of biblical stuff, but then I give, just my theory. I was like, in their wilderness wanderings, they get all these, that's where you get a lot of your do not do this, do not do that. And it says, no longer will you sacrifice to hairy goat demons. And it says, do not seek necromancers and sorcerers. Do not pass your children through the fires of Molech. Do not drink the blood, because the life is in the blood. I was like, we know the Amalekites were there. And according to like the writings of the medieval Rabbi Rashi and some of these other people, that the Amalekites were also sorcerers. And it said that's why it said kill every man, woman, and child and animal, because they were known shapeshifters. And they said that they would shapeshift into these animals to evade capture. So I postulate, I'm like, could they have been seeing, these hairy, quote unquote, men, what the Bible describes as hairy goat demons, these hairy giant clans that were sorcerers, passing children through the fire, drinking the blood, doing acts of necromancy and all this stuff. And some of God's people were starting to imitate them. And that's why God said, no, you can't be like these people, and laid out all the groundwork. Do not do this, do not do that. And then when they finally go head to head and have their war, this is the famous story where Moses has to stand on the mountain and hold his rod, his supernatural rod, over his head. And only when he holds that rod up are they able to defeat the Amalekites. And it said that when he would grow tired and lower the rod, that they'd start losing the battle. So I'm like, I think we're missing a whole supernatural side of that battle, that Moses is up on one mountain, battling with Yahweh on his side. But then on the opposite side of the valley is the high priest of the Amalekites, their sorcerer. And there's a whole just supernatural thing going on behind the scenes.
It makes a lot of sense too, because when you think about where the Nephilim came from, well, they came from fallen angel. They're part fallen angel. And some of the abilities that angels can do, we hear stories that the Nephilim could do as well, because we read about how like even Satan can transform to like this an angel of light. So it seems like they're able to make themselves look like whatever they want, the fallen angels. And it to me, it's like too much of a coincidence that people say that about Bigfoot too. And we hear these stories about the Nephilim being able to do that too. Even what you said about how they would kind of hide in the woods. Well, it kind of reminds me of the story of the angel that killed thousands and thousands of this whole army. And to me, like an angel is an extra dimensional being. So, and it would be easy for one angel to kill however many people it wanted to, or however many people God commanded it to, by just stepping back into an extra dimension, because we wouldn't be able to see it. Well, isn't that kind of similar to what they're doing when they're stepping back into the woods where they can't be seen? It's like they're almost intrinsically masters of using their environment to their advantage. So that connection makes sense. That's really, really interesting to me. You mentioned a couple of them, but what are some what are the resources that you used to explore and compile this book?
I dove into Rashi, that medieval rabbi, and he did a translation and commentary on the first 5 books of the Torah. And that was really cool to kind of just step back in time and get that, Jewish rabbi perspective on a lot of things. I really dove into Louis Ginsburg and the Legends of the Jews. That was really cool. That was a 9-book series. And Gary Wayne's Genesis 6 conspiracy theory, that was really good for going through the genealogies and stuff. Logos Bible software, that was an amazing tool. And then I liked getting into some of the targums and like the midrashes and things like that, because I was trying my best to gain a perspective of the people of that time, to just kind of just step out of myself, step into the ancient Jewish mindset of the people that wrote these stories and that these stories were written to, and just kind of get rid of my preconceived notions and what I've been taught, and just see, what they thought and what they said. And one thing too is, like, we can argue all day long, if Esau was a Nephilim, or if Esau was even a serpent seed. There's all kinds of, debate that you can have about that back and forth, even with that, is it a physical seed? Is it a spiritual seed? I'm not dogmatic on any of this stuff. I just like to look at it and, postulate what it could be. But one thing that I did find was a lot of these writings were all pointing kind of to Esau being like a serpent seed. And it doesn't matter where you go. Rashi in his writings talks about the serpent, the Nakash, looked at Eve with lust and wanted her as his own wife. The Targums of Jonathan comes out and says that Cain was the product of Samael. That was basically how they believed Satan's angelic name to be, like before the fall. And then, like Louis Ginsburg in his Legends of the Jews, he talks about Esau and says that Jacob's angel was Gabriel, but Esau's angel was Samael. And it says that when he was born, he even had a serpent marking, like brand on him. And it was just cool to just see what they thought, what they believed and thought, and one thing that was wild, when it said that Esau found out that Jacob had deceived him and took the birthright, in the Bible, it says that he just, threatened to kill him. He was going to kill his brother, and how fitting is his name, Jacob the supplanter. In the Legends of the Jews, it says that he will bite his brother's neck until he is dead and drain him of his blood. And I was like, okay, maybe they're trying to make that connection with the Amalekites, the blood lickers and that sort of thing. And some of the rabbis talked about that meeting when Jacob finally comes home, and that he kisses Jacob's neck. And I never paid attention to that. I just thought he maybe kissed him on the cheek, but no, it says he kisses him on the neck. And like the Hebrew word for kiss and bite is like a one letter difference. So it was kind of like, they were saying that the rabbis were saying that this was kind of like a play on words. And of course, I mean, this is them adding their Jewish mysticism and lore to the story.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is factual, but it's interesting. But it says that when he goes to bite Jacob's neck, that the Lord hardened his neck like ivory, and that he blunted his teeth on Jacob's neck. So, I mean, I just thought this was really cool just to get in that mindset, see what they thought, see what their legends were and what their lore was. It's been an eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned too, that they add their own lore and mysticism in there, because we're not saying that this stuff is gospel truth. It just helps get in the mindset of people at the time. Cause for example, you mentioned serpent seed, and I've talked about this a couple of times on this channel, that at least the version that I'm aware of, that people tend to, the people that do believe in it today tend to go with this version that I'll explain, and then I'll explain why I don't believe there's any validity to it at all. But they'll say that in the garden you have the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and then the argument usually goes something along the lines of those trees are metaphorical, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was actually Satan sleeping with Eve, or something like that, some kind of sexual thing, so that when Cain was born, that Cain was the literal seed of the serpent, like the literal offspring of Satan. But I think there's a couple problems with that. First, if the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is metaphoric, then the tree of life would have to be as well. And what would the tree of life represent? Well, if that represents Satan, then the other one would have to represent Jesus. But they ate from the tree of life. They ate from the tree of life as well. And we know that the tree of life comes back once everything is restored. And it has, 12 different fruits, one for every month. And we all are able to eat that. That sustains our eternal state. So if one is metaphorical for, this act, the other one would have to be as well. And I don't think any Christian would really want to go down that road. So that's one problem. Second problem is just kind of just basic. I take the Bible literally. If you're going to make metaphors of one thing, then you can make metaphors of everything. But the third thing, I don't believe that Satan or the serpent, and some people say that the serpent in the garden and Satan might be two different beings. And I'm open to that. It very well could be. I know Michael Heiser taught that the Nakash was likely a separate being altogether from
job title.
Satan. Yeah, and I'm totally fine with that. I'm on the fence with that personally, but I'm okay either way.
Yeah, because John said that ancient twisting serpent.
Right. So I could see either way, but either way, we know what the punishment is for a fallen angel to mate with a human, and it's to be bound in the abyss. We learned that from the book of Enoch, and in the Bible, it indirectly says it, but we get evidence from there as well. So if that's the case, well, we know what the punishment was for the serpent, and it had nothing to do with being bound in the bottomless pit. So I don't think the serpent committed that sin. Now, I do think in the future Satan will, because I think like the Antichrist most likely will be the literal physical and spiritual. Yeah, son of Satan.
It says that she would have a seed and he would have a seed.
Right. And I also believe that's why Satan is bound in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. So we know that Satan does get that punishment at some time, and that is the punishment for a fallen angel mating with a human being. I think Satan is biding his time and waiting till probably, who knows, after the rapture, something like that. But he's waiting for a while because when he finally does that, he knows. Well, actually, I don't really know, because I think Satan probably thinks God is a liar, but he at least figures he's got one shot at this. He's seen all of his other fallen angel cohorts get bound in the abyss for the exact same sin. So I think he's biding his time. I don't think he's committed that sin yet. Otherwise, I think he would be bound in the pit too. So those are just a few of my thoughts about the serpent seed idea. Just so it doesn't throw the audience. Again, we're not saying that this is like legitimate and this is what the Bible teaches, the serpent seed idea. It's just that when you look into some of these, commentaries or extra biblical texts, or especially later medieval things or from Jewish scribes later on, or Jewish rabbis later on, it's more about just trying to understand what they believed and why from the stories, and then also understanding, they're going to embellish, they're going to exaggerate, they're going to put their own mysticism and their own, like you said, their own lore and legends in there. But maybe behind all that, it does call back to some kind of kernel of truth. Did I represent what you were trying to say fairly?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, and that's the thing I talk about in the book, because I've never really explored the serpent seed doctrine, because, and this is something I tell people on my show all the time. I'm like, don't take my word for it. Look it up and form your own opinions and see what you come up with. And Michael Heiser and some other people that I highly respect and looked up to and read their stuff. A lot of those guys just laughed at the serpent seed doctrine and just, threw it away. And I just was like, hey, if they said it, I'm good with it. I know they're well-studied guys. So me in this book, I have a chapter about, the serpent seed and going through what they believed and what the writing said and pointed to. And I even say it in the book, whether it's physically, true or not, that's just debatable, but I'm showing you that's what they believed. That's what they pointed to. And at the same time, it's like, we can explore these things. We can look these things out, because at the end of the day, even if there is a serpent seed and it proves true, and I know this is way out there for some people, it does nothing to the doctrine of faith. It does nothing to salvation. So it's not worth, because some people, man, they don't even want to have this conversation. I even talk about it in the book. I'm like, some of the stuff I'm going to talk about might be triggers for some people. Don't light your torches and grab your pitchforks and come after me. We're all brothers and sisters in Christ, and right, wrong, or indifferent, it does nothing to change the gospel. It's just a difference of like theological perspective and viewpoint on some things. But I'm not going to lie. I had a woman come on my show a while back, and that wasn't the subject. The subject was the beast mark, at the end of days. And she started talking about the serpent seed. And a lot of the stuff she was talking about, man, I ain't going to lie, I was like, whoa. And like, for instance, she was talking about how it says they just partook of this tree, and then all of a sudden they covered their private parts, and she told like this story, we're not allowed to have sweets before dinner. When I was a kid, I tried to steal a cookie, and while eating it, my mother walked in and caught me. You know what we did? She said, we covered our mouth, because that's where the sin was. That's where the transgression was. That's what we wanted to hide. And then she said, and Mosaic law, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. She said, and all the, what do you call it? The punishments and judgments of God and cursings from God always directly aligned with the sin. And she said, and what happens at the curse? She says, Eve is cursed with menstrual cramps, painful childbearing. Her seed is cursed. The serpent's seed is cursed. And I was like, yeah, I never looked at it like that, man. You know what I mean? It's pretty wild stuff just to go down and look at,
Yeah, and that's it's a good thing to look at this stuff, because I remember when I first heard it too, years and years and years ago. But when I first heard it, there were things like that spoke to me as well. It was like, wow, that's really interesting. And I forget, I'm so bad at quoting Bible verses word for word, but I could usually get the gist of it. But it's either in Proverbs or it's somewhere in there, but it says that it's basically getting the point across that the first time you hear something, it's always going to sound really, really interesting. But then the more you look into it is where you really get to the truth of it. And I'm totally butchering that, but it says it way more succinctly and beautifully, and I believe it's in Proverbs. But anyway, like, and I noticed that with a lot of things, but this one as well. because again, when I first heard all that, I was like you, I wasn't fully buying into it, but I wanted to explore it and I wanted to see how it compared with the Bible. So I took some time and looked at both sides of the serpent seed argument. And for me, after I came out of it, it's like, well, the things that would have to change in the Bible to make that work, like the things that I would have to turn into metaphors, I personally am not comfortable doing that because the rest of the Bible isn't written that way. It would be only like this because usually and there are metaphors in the Bible, but they make it clear when there is like there's usually an angel that'll explain what it means or something. The Bible doesn't leave us in the dark about that. So it would be like the only time. And so yeah, to me, after I looked at it and I looked at what that would mean and the fact that to make, the biggest one for me is if the one tree is a metaphor, the other one is too. And no one wants to go down that road of because if eating from the tree of the fruit of good and evil, if that means that, it would follow that it would have to mean that for the tree of life too. But like no Christian would agree with that because that's awful. That's like borderline blasphemy. Actually, that is blasphemous. It's awful. So no one would suggest that. So it's to me when I see a theory where you have to do some of these pick and choosing kind of things, for me, and I'm not saying that I'm throwing it out completely. Because the last thing I want to be is like those people that don't want to even talk about it and they just laugh.
Oh, exactly. I got it all figured out and you're stupid. There's too much of that going on. Oh, way too much. That's actually the attitude that when I was a kid, it drove me into New Age because I had questions about aliens and stuff in the Bible and Bigfoot and stuff like that. And I couldn't get a pastor or any elder of the church or anybody to give me any like serious time to talk about it. They're just like, Josh, that's all. Just don't even worry about it. Well, I can't help it. I'm curious about it. And it led me straight into the New Age because nobody was willing to just talk. You went to somebody that was going to talk about it. Yeah, exactly. Because New Age wasn't. And that's what I said in the book too, was a lot of people that, are like that, about the serpent seed, not even look at it or to talk about it. They use that, what is it? That verse where Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, he says, you are of your father, the devil, who was a murderer from the beginning, pointing back to Cain. And they'll say, so what does that mean? Satan just going around having his way with all kinds of people and just having a whole family of seeds running around. And it's like, well, you got spiritual, alignments of things. And that's kind of what that was talking about. But if you follow that story on down, the Pharisees' reply shows you, like we were talking about, the mindset and the thought of the people of that time, whether true or not, because they reply with, and a lot of people don't go that far, but if you keep going, when they reply, they say, we were not born of fornication. We have but one Father. And that's what that was alluding to, the thought of the people of that time that Cain was born out of adultery. And there was multiple fathers. Well, no, we weren't born out of adultery. We ain't like Cain.
And it's so interesting because it shows how the Pharisees would add, because they had their whole oral Torah thing. So they would add a lot. And that was like Jesus's biggest gripe with the Pharisees, is that they followed the traditions of their fathers. They added to things instead of just taking the text for what it is. And then we see that in later Jewish works as well. This is so interesting. We got a lot more to talk about because I want to ask you about Nimrod. The whole story of the supernatural garments. And I want to talk about all that because there's a lot there. But before I do, before I ask you that, where can people pick up your book and follow you online?
Oh, yeah. You can pick up my book on Amazon. It's exclusively on Amazon. You can get it on ebook for $10 or for paperback for $20. And as far as the podcast, anywhere you can consume content, whether it's YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all the social medias, pretty much just type in Prometheus Lens podcast and you should be able to find me on any of those fine establishments.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And I highly suggest everybody check that out.
Hey guys, you found yourself at the end of the line, and this means that you're not an all access pass holder. So I got to play the Gandalf here and slam it down and say, you shall not pass. hey, if you'd like to join us on the hero's journey and get the rest of this episode, and not only this episode, you get 48 hours early to every single episode in the future, and gain access to an entire library of members-only content, access to the private Facebook community, and monthly Q&As with authors and speakers and researchers that I've had on the show. Head on over to PrometheusLensPodcast.com and sign up. It's quick, it's easy, and I'm only asking you to sacrifice a happy meal once a month. You're without an excuse. Homeless people come up with $5 to $10 a day for their addictions. Nobody's that hard up. Torch is high, guys.